Environment and Climate Committee will please come to order. It's Monday, February 17th, 2025, 12:35 p.m., and we are here in Minnesota Senate Building Room 1150. A quorum is present. Thank you, folks. We're going to have two presentations today. First from the Minnesota Department of Commerce with a budget overview, and then the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission with the budget preview. Members, let's have all the testifiers from the Department of Commerce first and see if we have questions for them. Do the same for the PUC, and off we go. With that, I would invite Commissioner Arnold and Deputy Commissioner Wyckoff to come forward, please. Commissioner, welcome back to the committee.
Hi, thank you. All right.
We allow interlopers. You'll still have to introduce yourself. Commissioner, thank you for bringing your team here. Why don't we have introductions across the board and then be happy to take your testimony.
Sure, that sounds great. And I think Pete's going to get his computer connected to do our slides. So while he's doing that, good afternoon, Chair friends and members. For the record, I'm Grace Arnold, Commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Commerce. Pete, do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Pete Wyckoff, Deputy Commissioner of Commerce for the Energy Division.
And Chair, friends, and members, I'm Melissa Polish. I'm the Assistant Commissioner of Federal and State Initiatives for the Department at the Division of Energy Resources.
Thank you. Commissioner, you've got the floor. Are we set, Mr. Wyckoff, from a tech standpoint?
There we go.
There. Yes.
Apparently,
Thank
yes.
you. Fire away.
All right. So thank you for inviting me to the committee to walk through the work of the Department of Commerce in the energy space and present on our governor's budget priorities. So I'll quickly just do a review of the department. I think many of you are familiar, but for more than 150 years, the Department of Commerce and its predecessor agencies have served Minnesotans. We protect and assist consumers. We regulate and oversee over 40 industry areas to protect consumers and ensure a strong, competitive, and fair marketplace. And we work to engage people and communities across the state. At Commerce, we carry out our mission through 5 strategic priorities, which are to protect the public interest, to serve as a trusted resource, to reduce economic barriers, and to build resilience in the face of a changing climate, and then what I think of as our bedrock, which is to ensure a strong, competitive, and fair marketplace in Minnesota. And we do this in the context of the broader Walz-Flanagan administration initiatives related to climate. Minnesota is leading the way in climate solutions. We've reduced greenhouse gas emissions, improved energy efficiency, and invested in climate resilience. Together, we'll continue to build a cleaner, safer future for Minnesota. In 2023 and 2024, the legislature approved over $1 billion in funding to transition to clean energy, reduce climate pollution, and prepare communities for the impacts of climate change. This funding, along with the substantial federal investments that our team has been able to win at the federal level, have contributed to significant progress on Minnesota's climate action framework, and which is the state's plan to reduce climate pollution and prepare for the impacts of climate change. Minnesota is experiencing an energy transformation with shifts in how we power our homes and businesses, and we're seeing clean energy investments in every corner of the state for rural electric cooperatives, for schools and local governments, for nonprofits, for tribal nations, for homeowners and renters, and the utilities that power many of the buildings and homes that we live in. With that, I will turn it over to our team to walk through the many things that we do within the Division of Energy Resources.
Thanks, Commissioner. Mr. Wyckoff, maybe you're leading here.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Committee. So, as I said a minute ago, I'm Pete Wyckoff. I'm the Deputy Commissioner. I oversee all of the Division of Energy Resources, which is the part of Commerce that reports to this committee. I was asked by the Chair to do a fairly broad presentation today about who we are and what we do at DER, the big issues we are thinking about, and then talk about not only state funding and our budget request, but also an update on federal funding and how that is helping us implement the Minnesota State energy policy. So DER, Division of Energy Resources, is divided into 2 sides with 2 assistant commissioners. On the right here, but not here today, is our regulatory affairs side, led by Assistant Commissioner Dr. Sydney Lieb. She will certainly be testifying in front of you at some point in this term. That side of the shop does two big things. One, it has a regulatory affairs unit. You're going to hear from the Public Utilities Commission later in this hearing. I kind of like to think of what our regulatory affairs unit is as being somewhat akin to the state's attorney at the Public Utilities Commission. They are the judges. We are those who are charged with working with the governor to advocate in the public interest. We're the ones that bring settlements together if they are going to be brought together. Tomorrow we will be starting 2 days of a large settlement docket in front of the Public Utilities Commission for Xcel Energy. Also at Regulatory Affairs, we run the utility conservation programs. That is the ECO Act that this body passed not that long ago. And we have a very small telecommunications unit because although we do not do broadband, we still do landlines, which are regulated through the PUC. On that side of the shop, there's another office that does energy reliability and security. They do system reliability planning and risk monitoring and response. I'm joined today by Assistant Commissioner Alyssa Polish, who runs our programs and policy side, focusing on implementing both the programs that you all pass as a state legislature, plus the programs we run thanks to federal funding. That office is divided into that side of the shop is divided into two offices: energy affordability, which is focused on residential, and runs the federal programs for energy assistance. We call it EAP, it's called LIHEAP nationally, and weatherization. They also run the federal homes energy rebates programs that are coming to us thanks to funding from the Inflation Reduction Act. In addition, that side runs the pre-weatherization program that you all funded in the 2023 session, which allows us to take Minnesota homes that might not be eligible for the federal program and bring them to a point where they can be eligible. The other side of the shop is energy development, the other side of that side of the shop is the Energy Development Office, which runs all of our non-residential programs. Those are in solar, they're in grid work, they are in electric vehicles to some extent, they are everything else. That side also that office also includes what I call our think tank, or where we keep our nerds, a technical assistance and education shop. And for the next few months, we have an environmental review unit. Because of the 2024 permitting reform legislation, that unit will be moving at the start of the new fiscal year over to the Public Utilities Commission. Can I get rid of that?
Just say close all and update.
All right. So what do we do? Well, the big driver of what we do is the law and policy passed by you all. And the biggest of those right now is the 100% carbon-free electricity standard by 2040. That puts Minnesota, along with about 13 or 16 other states, at the forefront of a clean energy change and transition for the system. And we are moving in that direction, and we are working and charged by the legislation to work with the Public Utilities Commission to implement that bill and its details, and we are doing that through a series of Public Utilities Commission dockets. That is a mandate. That is the law of the land. Minnesota has another target where electricity will be really important to meet, and that is a net zero greenhouse gas emissions economy-wide target. The way we know how to decarbonize most of our economy runs through the electric system. So the work we're doing is not only important for the electric system itself, but for economy-wide decarbonization. We are charged with implementing this law and every other law in a way that leads to an energy system that is fair, affordable, and reliable, and none of those can be compromised. We're in a period of rapid change. This is a chart coming from a study that this body commissioned on storage and storage needs, But when you run studies like this, you model the whole energy system. So this is the electric system in Minnesota as it exists today, and that's the blue bars here. And these green bars show one low-cost option, and I'll show you what we mean by low cost in the next slide, for meeting the 2040 law in a way that preserves reliability, affordability, and fairness. What you'll see is this is capacity. It's not how much electricity we're using, but how much we have ready to go when we need it. Gas will remain a very big and important part of our grid, even though we won't use our gas plants all that long. We need them for reliability. So we anticipate that they will be around even in 2040. Coal, on the other hand, is something we are largely moving away from. We're also moving away from fuel oil as a fuel in our generating plants. The next two bars show what we have already out there and what we call clean, firm energy availability. One is nuclear, where what this chart says is we're going to keep our 3 existing nuclear units at 2 nuclear plants. And the hydro shows an optimized solution would keep the hydro we have as well. Solar, we will see a huge growth, really no matter what, but also in meeting 2040, in terms of capacity of solar out there. Same for wind. These have a huge advantage. They run without fuel costs. If you have them on the system, that's what you will run when they are available. You will run those gas plants only when they're not. Finally, what we're going to need is a additionality of more clean, firm resources. Those clean, firm resources can come in the form of long-duration storage, but they can also come in the form of new nuclear or additional hydro or carbon capture and storage on fossil plants or converting fossil plants to run on something clean. There are options, but there's not a tremendous number of options. This is from that same study. This shows the cost we would see in the electric sector in Minnesota if we did nothing more in the move to clean compared to the costs we expect with the move to the 2040 law. Red is don't do more. Don't do more, but assume that by keeping coal online and by keeping more fossil fuels around, we will see a cost to that in terms of health, in terms of the environment. So the red is the highest line in terms of costs, and that is a don't do 2040 line. Orange is the same thing, but it says maybe you don't care about those non-electric bill benefits. So let's pretend there's no health costs of keeping the current system. Let's just look at what the actual cost of delivering the electrons are. And we see orange as the middle line here. Black is a line showing what we expect with the 2040 law and moving fast to meet it. All 3 lines, I will note, show some increase in electric costs through much of the rest of this decade. But then we see a divergence. We see that divergence because by moving faster to clean, we are moving faster to a lower cost system that is running on no fuel cost electric sources much of the time. There is a financial benefit of this move to clean. At the end you say, wait a second, Pete, what's going on? Why do the costs seem to rise again as we get near 2040? And that is something we're hoping to avoid, but as reflecting the reality that nuclear costs a lot right now. Long duration storage costs a lot right now. Carbon capture and storage costs a lot right now. And as we get to the point where we're nearing 100%, we're going to need some additional. And we hope they come down in terms of the cost curve. But that 2040 law has ways to say, it's getting too costly. We're not going to do it. We'll take an off-ramp as needed. But we hope and don't think for sure we're going to need those. But that's, make no mistake about it, that is what would drive an increase in costs at the end as we approach 100. The very technologies that many are pushing this session, and we think there are good reasons to push those technologies. There's some other important things that are driving our work and our work on implementing this, including the 2024 permitting reform, which should take time off of building important energy infrastructure. I'll also point out that federal support is important. What this chart shows you very briefly in the 2030 and then 2035 bins are what would be the cost to ratepayer bills nationwide on average if we roll back EPA air standards. They would ironically drive costs up if we do that. And then the second question is, what if we roll back the Inflation Reduction Act? Those would definitely drive up costs. By those two things from the federal side, pushing us to clean faster, pushing us faster to a low carbon, low cost system, ratepayers actually benefit. I want to switch now to talking about funding. So just in broader context, most of the funding we get at the Division of Energy Resources comes from the federal government. The annual state general fund request we are here to ask for the next biennium is $14.25 million per annum. Put that in the context of currently under contract, so not just 1 year's worth, but currently under contract to Commerce is $1 billion in federal funding. The bad news there is much of that is currently frozen, and I'll return to that. But in terms of where does the money come from that we work with, it mostly comes from the federal government. The money you all give us helps us get that money. I would also point out that obligated federal grants to the Minnesota energy sector, mostly from the Inflation Reduction Act and the IIJA or Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, are way over $1 billion. Those also seem to be currently frozen. If those disappear, there will be massive ratepayer impacts for Minnesota. The chair talked about this comparison, so I threw it in here. We are trying to bring millions, if not billions of dollars of federal funding into Minnesota to help us with our energy system. That money, to the extent we get it and the extent we're able to get it more than other states, can help counterbalance the fact that we are an orange and not a blue state in this graph. Orange states are where you don't want to be because orange states are states that pay more in taxes than they get back in federal funds. We are working hard at the Department of Commerce Energy Division to help turn Minnesota blue in a non-political way. I want to walk through our funding sources, including and starting with our ask here. And Grace, it looks like maybe you want to jump in? No, all right. For this session, what we are asking for as part of the governor's budget is $14.25 million per annum. About $6 million of that is non-ridered, so it doesn't have a specific Commerce do this function for this money. But I'll say there's also a bunch of functions that we are mandated to do that don't have a rider. So, for instance, we produce a quadrennial energy report that takes time and money, and that comes out of that $6.04 million. That is our flexible money, and it's really important to us. We also have a lot of ridered money, some of which is just a pass-through, but the biggest ridered thing we have in our budget ask this year is $3.2 million for our pre-weatherization program. That is money that helps us get people to where they can use federal money in the state of Minnesota. Additionally, in the RDA, which you control, not us, there's $600,000 in RDA funds for the biennium, $400,000 of which are pass-through funds in our ask. Overall, Commerce is asking for an operating adjustment. We don't have DER broken out numbers here, but the agency is asking for $1.2 million for FY26 and $1.8 million for FY27 and going forward. That is to upgrade technology. That is for the services that are used commerce-wide to run a clean, efficient, fraud-free agency. And Commissioner Arnold, I'm sure will have more to say about that if you have questions. We are not asking for additional monies for the FY23 or from the 23 legislative session programs that were authorized and we are implementing. But I wanted to give you an update to say, yes, we are still working through those funds. They have allowed us to stand up a bunch of different, good, strong, fraud-free programs. And we are happy to answer specifics about the finances of any of them. But we are not asking for additional monies in the governor's budget for any of those programs. I do want to point out that some of those programs, I think all of them, have an impact. And they have an impact all around the state, so I just wanted to highlight 3 quickly. One is the Solar for Schools program that, thanks to additional funding in the 2023 legislative session, expanded to not just be K-12, but state colleges and universities. At the beginning of the year, we had, and just reported it up to you in our legislative report, funded 141 schools spread across the state, as you can see from that map. This is urban, this is rural, this is every part of Minnesota. We're also standing up an electric resilience grant program as one of those programs. It is for eligible electrical utilities to increase their grid resiliency. It pairs or complements a federal program that we are also administering in Commerce. It has some advantages in the money's more flexible than the federal program. For instance, cyber attack defense is something that we are funding and will be funding out of this program and is not included in the federal equivalent. The program launched in September. We are currently working through 40 applications from 29 applicants, and the awards will be announced very soon. Third thing I'll mention is the State Competitiveness Fund, which was money you gave us, $190 million in total. I'm focusing here on the $100 million, which is a pot of money for grants to match federal grants to allow more of that federal money to flow to Minnesota. It is going for matching grants for energy projects from the IRA and IIJA loan program, or I'm sorry, grant programs. To date, more than 80 of the $100 million have been reserved. That's what happens when a application goes into the federal government. The awards we've given out have ranged from $29,000 to $10 million. At this point, we have leveraged nearly $100 million in federal funding, and we have a bunch of things that are waiting to figure out where they stand, with lots of action at the federal level in the last month. Just like Solar for Schools, these projects are spread throughout all of Minnesota. We're getting good regional coverage. I want to talk about federal funding to end this, and then of course we'll go to questions. I want to divide it into 2 pieces. One is ongoing federal funding. These are the funding sources we've had for a long time. They are based on annual federal appropriations, and we have 3 of them. One that isn't all that interesting to most people, but is very important to Commerce, is something called the State Energy Program Funds. It's not a whole lot of money, but it is important for us because it helps pay for us in a flexible way to do the things you ask us to do. It's kind of like that non-rider $6 million. We get about $3 million from that program. If it is cut going forward, we will have problems. The two much more flashy and bigger programs that are part of annual appropriations are energy assistance. Michael Schmitz, I think, was here a week ago, and we're happy to come back and talk about that more. It is a program that is important for Minnesotans across Minnesota, with the bulk of the support going to rural Minnesota. The other big one is the Weatherization Assistance Program, which has gone on for years, and we run one of the model programs in the country here in Minnesota. For this year, we have $18 million in regular appropriations, and for a 5-year period that goes 4 more years, we have supplemented that with bipartisan infrastructure law funds, IIJA bill, to the tune of $19.5 million. As of late last week, that second pot of money was frozen. We are scrambling now, and we'll work with our service providers to see what we can do about reallocating funds between the appropriation side, the 18 million, and that side. But there is going to be a real cost to these federal funding freezes that we are seeing, and it's going to hurt Minnesotans across the board. Which gets us to our last 2 pots of funding, both federal. Minnesota Department of Commerce is running several programs that come to us thanks to federal funding through the IIJA and IRA that come to us as formula funding. It's just, this is what Minnesota gets. $273 million in total to benefit Minnesotans for energy conservation, expansion of that state energy program funding I mentioned, reliability and resiliency program for the Minnesota electrical grid, the federal side of that state program I talked to you about, the weatherization assistance funding, and rebates that we are getting near to rolling out for individuals for home efficiency and electrification. As of the end of last week, all of that money is frozen. We are working hard with the AG's office to tell the federal government a contract is a contract. You don't get to pick and choose. You don't get to say, I wish I hadn't signed that contract. But bizarrely and unprecedentedly, the current administration is trying to make that claim. We wish the federal government hadn't signed that contract, so we would like out. And we are saying no. Along those lines, we've been extremely successful as a state in getting competitive funds from the IIJA and IRA. I'm almost done. Some exciting things are going to happen in Minnesota if those funds flow. There was a recent announcement. We already have the pilot plant for Niron Magnetics, which is a University of Minnesota spinoff that the world is excited about making magnets from iron rather than the rare earth metals that come from China. That company received, it's called a tax credit, but it functions as a grant, a competitive tax credit, to the tune of $52 million to open a plant in Sartell, Minnesota. That money is under threat. We will be continuing to depend on Chinese rare earth elements for our magnets if we do not build out industries like this in the United States, and here's a chance to do it in Minnesota using iron. The other thing I'll point out is that Great River Energy, the major generation and transmission G&T co-op in Minnesota, received an $812 million grant That does a lot to offset energy costs as we move to that lower cost, higher renewable future for all Minnesota utilities. If that grant doesn't come through, Minnesotans in rural Minnesota will lose out in a major, major way. As far as we can tell, every one of these grants that I'm showing here that should be coming to Minnesota, some through the Department of Commerce, some through our utility partners, is in danger or frozen as we speak. And I'll repeat, we are working with the Attorney General's office to say this is unacceptable. This is not how a federal government behaves. And that's what we will be pushing. And sorry to leave you on a sour note, but I think you need to know this. So.
Appreciate that, Dr. Wyckoff. Members, let's go to questions here for Department of Commerce where appropriate, and then finish with the questions for the Department of Commerce, then have the PUC, then go through that process. Senator Matthews, I do have Senator Gruenhagen and Senator Zhang, but as the ranking member, I suppose you could go before them. All right, Senator Gruenhagen.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the presentation. Yeah, just a couple questions. One, I've got it's a constituent question, and his neighbor had put up some windmills, and they wore out and had to be taken down. He put them in the middle of a field. When they took the windmill down, they said they couldn't take the cement base down because it was too expensive. So now he's got, this farmer has two big cement bases in the middle of his field that he has to work around. Isn't there, what are the farmer's options to get rid of those? Is there a fund being developed or in force that is set aside, kind of like we do for our landfills, so that we can clean this stuff up? I mean, he did not, according to my customer farmer, he did not want, who's good friends with this farmer who had, what with the windmill, by the way, my customer through the insurance agency, he didn't. But how do they clean this up? Because now he's got a nice field with two big circular cement things in there. And is there a fund, kind of like we do with our landfills, where money's set aside to clean this stuff up when it goes kaput, which we all know it's going to go kaput eventually?
Thank you, Senator Gruenhagen. Maybe Dr. Wyckoff, you want to tackle that one first, or do we want to go to Ms. Polish, or you go wherever you want to go with this question?
That's fine, sure.
Chair.
Assistant Commissioner.
Senator Gruenhagen, I don't know that there is a fund right now for that. Typically, that would be covered in the original agreement, where it would include decommissioning, which would require decommissioning back to the original state. I'd be happy to follow up and get more information from you and explore some options.
Okay.
Senator Gruenhagen.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, thanks for that response. I was just wondering about that. The second thing is, under the ECO Act, a community is supposed to use 1.5% less electricity every year. I don't know how many years that goes on, forever or whatever. How does a community grow their town, business and residential, and still reduce their electricity by 1.5%?
Assistant Commissioner, maybe you want to try that one as well?
Chair, Senator Gruenhagen, I don't think that there's anything in ECO that is aiming to discourage economic development. In fact, as you encourage economic development, that allows for that load growth in that base, but it's off of that projected energy usage that you would aim for the 1.5% conservation.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, as we are looking at bringing on load growth for the first time, honestly, in a long time in the electric sector, the ECO Act is such that we are looking to make sure we are efficient, but it doesn't preclude the growth of load. It encourages growth of load in an as efficient way as possible.
Senator Gruenhagen.
Oh, just, one of my communities, the municipal power plant manager said, it seems like a contradiction, and he's worked for 20, 30 years in this area, so, you know, that's somebody on the ground trying to work with this, okay? So I'll just give you that input. Last question.
If you could connect us with this person, we are happy to talk to them.
Okay, thanks. Last question is, you know, I looked at your graph on 8 as far as lowering the cost of electricity here with the 2040 bill, but then I looked at page 10 where the federal funds are frozen right now. You are aware we have a president who calls the Green New Deal a scam, and it's anti-science, and it's simply a waste of money. So I think you're going to have a fight on your hands with the federal government, however that works out. But in the event, when you did these graphs showing lower cost, did you assume in those graphs that these billions of dollars would come from the federal government to help keep electricity costs lower?
None of these grants are assumed in that graph.
Okay.
So they are bonus on top of that. What is assumed in that graph is that federal clean energy tax credits will continue. The new incoming administration has made no moves to this point to try to stop them from continuing.
Okay. Just a final comment.
Senator Gruenhagen.
You know, all I've seen is my electricity costs going up ever since we started the Green New Deal, okay? It's non-base load. It's, we've seen what happens with a polar vortex down in Texas when we had people freeze to death when it got 30-some below zero, and I think that's what we're setting ourselves up for. I also had a major newspaper in my district about a year ago put a front-page article. You know, this city has about 15,000. They said, we may experience short-term blackouts this summer. So unfortunately, this is the direction we're going, and it does give me a lot of concern. And I happen to agree with President Trump, it's a scam. Thank you.
Can I answer?
Thank you, Senator Gruenhagen. Dr. Wyckoff, if you want, or we could move on.
Okay, we
Dr.
can move on.
Wyckoff. All right. Senator Gruenhagen, we're watching costs on this committee, and the most recent news we saw was that natural gas costs were headlines because of the rate increases. So we agree we want to compete on cost, and one of the pledges of the Senate Energy Committee is that these technologies will be allowed to compete with each other for cost. We have some utility friends who aren't testifying today who will tell you they're watching that closely. And to the extent we're asking what the federal funds implications are of the new administration, I think it's exactly what we should be asking, which is how does it affect our consumers, our ratepayers, our utilities, and to the extent possible, the agency. So good testimony. Thank you for that. We're going to go to Senator Zhang and then to Senator Matthews. Vice Chair Zhang.
Thank you, Chair, Mr. Wyckoff, or maybe anybody on the panel. So for some of the federal funding freezes, if it continues on and the state is no longer able to access that fund, is there sort of a date or a plan that we're looking at and how to address that as a state, or recommendations that you would have for us in how we can sort of plan for that future? Because it's February, do we wait till March? Is April, is it October, December?
It is a changing target every day. The total freezing of everything that I mentioned was frozen, was as of late last week and new last week. So we are hoping that it is very temporary. What I will point out, what is flowing is we had some problems with things like energy assistance and the normal weatherization funds at the beginning. Those are flowing again and don't seem to be immediately at risk, though I think they are in upcoming budget negotiations. So we are scrambling as of the end of the last week to come up with where are things likely to stay frozen, and we will come back to you, I'm sure, with updates and requests, but we do not have any right now.
Thank you, Dr. Wyckoff. Senator Zhang.
Chair, and maybe this is probably just a statement for the committee. I I think we might need to look at some of the competitive grants that we've committed as a state and see if, what's happening if we're not going to get those fundings anymore. What do we do with that? What is the plan going forward for those, some of the matching grants that we've committed as a state? And now it seems like the federal government is not going to honor those contracts. And so I'm very concerned. I think many of our constituents and our folks are just unsure about what's going to happen. And so I think it's something that we might need to spend a little time on.
Chair and Senator, I very much appreciate that. I think it is early days and premature. We have been working with the Attorney General's office on various suits related to this, and we are winning those suits. So we will see where it goes.
Thank you, Dr. Wyckoff. Senator Zhang, anything further?
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. We'll go to Senator Matthews. After Senator Matthews, I have Senator Green, Senator Dibble, and Senator Rarick. Senator Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the department for your questions. I want to ask you to dig into a list of things from your presentation. So 2 questions from your slide, page 13. I would like a little more specificity on why you're asking for $6 million additional dollars non-ridered. Only topic that was thrown out is one possible report. And I'm going to be extremely skeptical of saying, please give us $6 million for whatever we want to do with it.
Can I be
Not going to fly.
Senator Matthews, thank you. We'll sort of referee from the chair, if that's okay, Dr. Wyckoff and Commissioner. Do you have a member of the testifiers that you're directing that to, or let them pick?
Whoever wants to answer that is welcome to.
Commissioner, why don't we give you the first bite at some of these questions? Do you want to tackle that, or do you want to go?
Yeah, I can take that
All
one.
right,
So Chair
Commissioner-
Friends and
Commissioner
Senator
Arnold.
Matthews, thanks for the question. So this is this is equal to the baseline from fiscal year 2023. So except for the agency-wide operating adjustment, which has a number of things, as Dr. Wyckoff mentioned, this is not any additional funds, but this is sort of outlining the way that the budget's spent currently. So we're not asking for additional. This is not an additional request. It's the baseline request from 23.
Thank you, Commissioner. Senator Matthews.
Okay, so you're saying every biennium, you get $6 million of non-encumbered, non-ridered money?
Correct.
What'd you do with your $6 million from the last 2 years?
Commissioner Arnold.
Senator Friends and, or Chair Friends and Senator Matthews, I'll ask Dr. Wyckoff to talk through some of the specifics. I think he mentioned earlier that it's funding some of the basic work that we do kind of across the board and supporting all the programs that we have on the subsequent slides, in addition to the programs that we've supported for a long time. But Dr. Wyckoff, can you jump in there?
Dr. Wyckoff.
Chair and Senator, I'm actually going to defer to Assistant Commissioner Paulishon.
Assistant Commissioner.
Chair Friends, Senator Matthews. I mean, this is how you think of the sort of core funding of the division. So it's for key staff, humans like this, to do all of the core work and make sure that we're getting to all of the implementation of all of the other programs that are there. This is the base level funding that is in the reliability and regulatory area, the energy development section and energy affordability sections, as well as the core to make sure that we have matching dollars that are required for the state energy program that comes through the federal funds. So this is core staffing to do all of our day-to-day duties that are required. So things like fraud prevention for our resource acquisition and distribution team, core functions like the quad report that Dr. Wyckoff mentioned, but also things like the Energy Information Center that we're required to provide energy information services and general education around energy topics. We could give you a more fulsome list if you so desire, and we can do some follow-up.
Senator Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So those sound like other categories that we have listed funding in, such as the competitive, the SCF, and some of these other funds. I'm still trying to connect all the dots between why we're calling it non-ridered to all of these things. And if it's just salaries, then just say that it's salaries for staff that we have on board. That seems like it would be one of the, I just don't recall ever seeing something come with this language to us before. Then I wanted to ask, Deputy Commissioner Wickoff that it sounded like you said that you use the phrase fraud-free several times, that you need an additional $3 million in the biennium, 1.2 plus 1.8, to ensure that you keep running the agency fraud-free. Did I understand that correctly?
Dr. Wyckoff,
Chair, I'll take this one, Chair Friends and
Okay.
Senator Matthews. So the agency operating adjustment is, I think what Dr. Wyckoff was communicating with that is that we run programs that are well-received and that are adhere to all the federal standards, and we run good programs. We would continue to run those with the additional money. The additional money goes to increase salaries, contractual salary increases that will come as part of the union negotiation process for our staff. It also goes to shared services, so we have, HR, all the, very basic bread and butter things that make an agency go and make us able to be here today, and to talk about the ways that we are using the money that you've appropriated. There's also a little bit of money in there for IT spend. We have one of the lowest proportions of IT spend out of any, state agency. We hold a lot of company data. We hold a lot of information. We also have limited ability to do analysis on some of the data that we have because we just have had a lack of investment in our IT area for a long time. So we have a need for some additional kind of support there that would likely end up being like contract staff to do projects, project management and things like that, help upgrade databases. We have some that are on technology that's not supported anymore. So those are the kinds of things that money would go for.
thank you, Commissioner. Senator Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if I'm hearing this, you're saying you need an additional $3 million in increased funding to continue operating the programs in the next 2 years the way you have been previously.
Commissioner Arnold.
And Chair France, Senator Matthews, that's across the entire agency. So that includes, so we have it here, we don't have it broken up by, Division of Energy Resources, and then all of the other budget items that fall under the Commerce Committee. So this is across the board in part because they're shared services that both, we don't divide an HR person by energy and non-energy work, right? They support all of our teams. And so this is the operating adjustment across the entirety of the agency. How that works out in terms of practical spreadsheet kinds of things, I think we can work through.
Senator Matthews, let me jump in here. Just for some context, Commissioner, the Department of Commerce in Minnesota, 320 employees, of which 90 or 95 are in the energy division, give or take, just for those of us looking at the budget. Is that in the ballpark?
At Chair Fence, we're up around 430,
Okay.
but the 90 is, 120, I think, are in.
We're about 120, 130.
Okay.
I don't have the,
That's fine. Just,
Current count.
like I
Yeah.
said, just for some context, so 430 total employees, maybe 120 in the energy, and what you're saying is the IT is not broken down, which is fine. Senator Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate that context. Let me ask you about some of your 23 and 24 programs. You showed a lengthy list of them. I want to ask you about two of them. First, the electric vehicle rebate application. How many rebates went out? How much money in total got spent on that program?
Commissioner, or do you want the Assistant Commissioner to try that?
Yep.
Assistant Commissioner
Mr. Chair,
Polish.
Friends, Senator Matthews, I believe it was 6,666 rebates that were paid out. All of the dollars have been fully expended as of December 31st of 2024.
And how much what was that dollar amount again?
The two combined were about 15 million in rebates.
Senator Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My second question will be on your electric school bus grants. How many grants went out for those? How many buses do you have on the road because of this? Do you have any of those funds left over from the previous biennium?
Assistant Commissioner.
Chair Friends, Senator Matthews. We are on the cusp of announcing the first round of buses, likely to be around 2.5 million in the general fund and just about 2 million in the RDA fund. The second round is about to be launched for the vehicle deployment. So we could give you more updates as we get further along in the session.
Again, Senator Matthews, if I could jump in, Assistant Commissioner, do you have a number of the school bus themselves grants? We think of school buses as about 10,000 statewide and following the numbers of electric school buses. So I think Senator Matthews is saying, what are we talking about as far as
How many will we
actual
get for that
buses?
4.5 million for this
Yeah.
first round?
Thank you, Senator. Thanks, Assistant Commissioner, if you have a number.
Senator Friends and Senator Matthews, I'll follow up with you with the exact numbers. We haven't released the awards yet. We don't ever announce anything until the contracts are firm and in place, but I can go back and get some numbers from the team.
Senator, let me take one last step. Sorry for interrupting. Would you be comfortable testifying to an average dollar figure per school bus grant? And we could reverse engineer it in our minds.
Senator Friends and Senator Matthews, I'd be happy to follow up with you, and I would be happy to reverse engineer for you. I just don't have the numbers right in front of me.
Okay, thank you. Senator Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would appreciate getting those numbers as soon as you're able to. And then I wanted to ask about the State Competitiveness Fund, and you threw out a number of projects and ranges and all of that. Wanted to ask you for like what a typical example is, but I think I'll ask it this way. You say you have awards ranging from 29,000 to 10 million. What was the $10 million project? And is that a typical type of project that's throughout, or what's the average type of project look like?
Chair and Senator, that was for Minnesota Power, and it was related to a $50 million federal grant in the GRIP grant program.
Okay.
The 29,000 end is things like REAP grants, which go to individual farmers. REAP grants, which go to individual farmers.
Okay.
Thanks, Dr. Wagner. Assistant Commissioner.
Chair
do you want-
Friends and Senator Matthews, Rural Energy for America program. It's a USDA-funded program that helps support rural small businesses and farms with energy efficiency and renewable energy projects.
Thank you.
Okay.
Senator Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My last question I wanted to ask you about is one of your graphs. Let me find it. It was page 9, talking about your federal support and the graphs about whether there would be, looking at potential of rollbacks versus non-rollbacks. And I did a quick search on who this source is, the Rhodium Group, and a couple minutes of a search seems to indicate that they're a think tank focusing on environmentalism and the economy and politics of China, and receive funding from multiple left-of-center private foundations with a number listed there. Some I recognize, some I don't. Why was this group chosen as a source for the study here that in this particular instance?
Dr. Wyckoff?
Thank you, Chair and Senator. From my years in Washington, I can tell you that Rhodium Group is a well-respected modeling group that is used over and over on questions of energy modeling. So we can find you a different source if you'd like.
Thank you, Doctor. Senator?
That's all I have for now. Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, Senator Matthews. Members, we have Senator Green, and then on deck, Senator Dibble and Senator Rarick. Remember, we're still hoping to have the Public Utilities Commission come in and testify. So, Senator Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You'll be happy to know that I crossed off some of my questions because they've already been asked. But I'm just going to touch on a couple of things from your report. If you would, just on page 6, I want to know if you can tell me how you calculate fair, affordable, and reliable.
Dr. Wyckoff.
So, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Senator. I'll get it. I'm new. So, affordable is something we have an entire unit that works on. How can we meet our energy needs in the lowest cost way? And we present those analyses to the Public Utilities Commission as part of the docketing process. Reliability is something that is governed not only by our work, but is governed by federal work through the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and NERC, which is our North American Reliability Council. It is not just us. It is us working with those federal sources, working with our balancing authorities, which are MISO and Southwest Power Pool in Minnesota, reliable is the starting point. You have to have that guaranteed. We would never make a move that threatens reliability. After we have guaranteed reliability, then we find how do we get the most affordable and cleanest system we can. We cannot and would not be allowed to, by these regional and federal authorities, cannot be moving in a direction that compromises reliability. But you know what? Commerce would not drive us that way either. It is a very important part of our analyses. We will spend tomorrow discussing Excel's plans at the PUC, and a big center question there, if you look through the 200 pages of documents, is what is the expected margin of safety for reliability in the plans that we will tell Excel at the end to carry out.
Thank you, Doctor. Senator Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For me, anyway, your statements are a little bit contradicting. Because if you're going to gauge, it sounds like you're gauging your affordability and your reliability off of a plan that may not work. And so how do you justify that? The 2040 plan, what if we can't get there? And then you go to your chart on page 9, and the only way to really keep the prices down is if we continue to get federal funding. And if federal funding goes away, now you've got increasing costs, and you could still, according to your statements, claim that they are fair and affordable as far as you can make them. And so if people get driven off their electric grids because they can't afford it, then so be it, I guess. But we'll move on, Mr. Chair. On page 15, I skipped over here so I to catch up with myself because I crossed off some stuff here. What I really would like here is, and I'm sure that this is somewhere online, could point me to that, if not, get it for me. I would like the data behind this. These, in particular, you know, we talked about the buses. And it seems to me, I remember reading, and I'm not going to be precise on this because it's been a few weeks since I read it, but you're only talking like less than 5 buses on this, if I'm not mistaken. So I'll be looking forward to that information because it's not very many buses you're going to get with $4.5 million. So I'd be interested in seeing that. And then this will be a question, Mr. Chair, on page 16. You're implementing 141 schools have been funded for solar. Is there anything in place that would that's going to be collecting data on the cost of those solar panels as opposed to what that school is going to be getting back in a rate reduction?
Thank you, Senator Green. Assistant Commissioner, you want to try that one?
Yeah, Chair Friends and Senator Green. We do collect data. We collect data on how big the systems are and their production. We'd be happy to follow up with more information.
Thank you, Assistant
Mr. Chair,
Senator
in the
Green.
interest of time, I'm going to ask a question that you can get back to me on. But first of all, do you have that data now where I can go get it, or are you still collecting it? The other thing is just one more question and then a comment. The weatherization, we've been doing weatherization for as long as I can remember. Longer than I can remember, I'm sure. And, you know, at some point, maybe it's not possible, but I was hoping we could catch up. Because we stick a lot of money into it, and the newer houses shouldn't need a lot of weatherization. Yeah. So is there anything in your data that shows that we're gaining any ground on this, or do we just keep putting more money into this program and never going back to see if it's making much difference?
Thank you, Senator Green. Assistant Commissioner, it seems to me Commerce sent over an estimate of how many homes might be eligible in a perfect world, but if you
Yes.
have the answer, I think Senator Green's looking for a number and a year by which we might be finished.
Chair Friends and Senator Green. So in the most recent Solar for Schools legislative report that was submitted in January, we have a listing of all of the schools that received funding and the size of the systems. So we do actually have that data already, and I'll happily follow up with you further. Before my current role here at Commerce, I was involved in looking at the number of homes that would be eligible for weatherization and looking at how much we're able to do in terms of weatherization every year. There are about 500,000 households that would qualify for energy assistance every year. About 125,000 of them actually receive that. We weatherize between 2,000 and 4,000 homes every year, so a small fraction of those that are eligible, just based on the amount of funding. It's about $8,000 a home to do weatherization. And at that pace at the time, we calculated it would take about 290 years before we were able to weatherize all of those homes, if just based on the weatherization funding available at the time. So it does require an ongoing investment. I think that's why there has been such optimism about the additional federal funds from both the bipartisan infrastructure law as well as some of the new rebate programs that are available to help make a deeper dent in that number of homes that we're able to serve.
Thank you, Assistant Commissioner. Senator Green, any follow-up?
I just have a couple of comments. First one is just kind of off the cuff. If you're going to wait 200 and some years, those houses will be gone. So let's not worry about that too much. You know, the one thing I want to talk to you about is, or comment on, is you continued to reference the freezes from the federal government. And I would point out that the amount of fraud that they found so far should give us pause to say, we need to keep looking into this because it's unbelievable. And then when you couple that with the fraud that's been in Minnesota, I think that everything is going to warrant to be looked at, because our agencies and our policies that we put in place are so deep into the weeds that it's just like a spider's web to go down them. But we're wasting a lot of money, and we need to clean that up. The other thing that you mentioned is, you know, on the ore that we're getting from China as opposed to here. I think that we do have a cure for that, and it's called permitting reform. And we are having a really tough time trying to drive through permitting reform. So if you want to help us out on that, I'd appreciate that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Green. Senator Green, I want you to know that the one thing I want to get on the record about the weatherization is that we tend to find we're helping those Minnesotan homes that need it the most. So it's same with LIHEAP. We know we're targeting the Minnesotans that have a little bit less, and I think that's a virtue of the program. And you have my pledge on questions of waste and fraud, that should be a bipartisan issue to try to lean in to try to prevent that as best we can. I'm glad Commerce does not bring with it those particular headlines, but I know you would welcome us to have any look-see, and I think that's part of it. Into that, we can debate what the best use of our resources is, Inspector General, closer oversight, whatever you want. But you have my pledge that that's a priority, I think, for every Minnesotan, regardless of party. I know I said we would get to the PUC, and we're still going to. But if Commerce could just sit tight, I have two other senators who would like to ask questions. First, Senator Dibble, and then Senator Rarick. Senator Dibble.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I think in this line of questioning, we're kind of stepping on the lead. I think we just heard from the agency that we're looking at about $1 billion, over $1 billion in funds that have been authorized and appropriated and under contract and are flowing to the state of Minnesota have been stopped dead in their tracks, Mr. Chair. I mean, that is breathtaking. I don't think we've ever seen that. If I could ask Mr. Wyckoff a question. Mr. Wyckoff, have you ever seen, you've been around DC and you've been around officialdom for quite a while. Have you ever seen in your entire career funds that have been authorized, appropriated in the pipeline on their way to states to support services and to create jobs stop dead in their tracks?
Dr. Wyckoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator. I think what is important to point out, I think is implied in your question, these are under contract. There is no precedent. This is saying that we take a contract not as something we are bound to by the federal government, but as something that if we feel like it. And I don't think there's any administration that ever has taken that stance.
Thank you, Dr. Wyckoff. Senator Dibble.
So, Mr. Chair, what I would be interested in, and hopefully we'll continue this conversation because I think the public in Minnesota needs to know that jobs that businesses have today, people who are working today, and potential jobs in the near future, we have a whole entire business that wants to open up in Sartell. People are going to lose their jobs. People who are providing this weatherization, who are delivering the services, building the products, people who are poised to save money from the savings in energy that they're going to experience, the utilities who are going to be put to greater expense so that we can meet our 2040 obligations. This is a direct attack on Minnesota's economy and Minnesota's jobs. I would love to know if we can quantify exactly how many jobs are under threat, either going to be lost, people working today, or jobs that won't materialize because we're going to lose these dollars that are already on their way to Minnesota. And I will add, Mr. Chair, Minnesota is a net donor. Typical blue state that gives huge grants to the federal government that flow to the red states. This is a way for us to even the playing field, and we're going to lose additional dollars, probably to red states, probably to Elon Musk's pocketbook. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Dibble, up until that moment, I was able to say my Republican colleagues were too partisan for today's hearing, but now it's tied. I want to assure you that I share your concerns, but I might be a little more pessimistic that we'll start losing jobs in Minnesota. The minute we start losing Minnesota jobs over the federal fund freeze, this whole thing's going to look very different. And so I'm glad that you've expressed yourself. I guess we'll see. Once Sartell goes down, it's all going to look different. And I think we do hear stuff out of the federal government through many different administrations that they propose and talk about, and they don't all happen. And so if I'm wrong, it'll be on me. I think I'm taking a little bit of a wait and see with that. And with the hope that we can move on from this Commerce presentation, I have only one more senator, and that is Senator Rarick. Senator Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's not a question. I do have one other comment to add now. I will say I realize people might say it's unprecedented to stop funds. I think the fraud that we've seen in Minnesota over the last few years is unprecedented as well. So if any state is going to have questions as to why we would put pause on funding, Minnesota should not be one of those states. But I want to get back, Mr. Chair, I appreciate you did correct what I wanted to speak about earlier. I found it disturbing that we had a testifier who continued to go past the chair and speak before being recognized. And it's also one, when we have a member who makes a statement, it is not proper for a testifier to say, I want to respond to that. Now, if another member wants to ask that testifier a question so that they may respond, that is appropriate. But we need to make sure we follow that, and I appreciate you getting control of it, Mr. Chair.
All right. We do actually have another senator who wants to ask a question, but Senator Rarick, you should count on the chairs, whoever has the gavel, to create an environment where testifiers can respond if they want. We'll try to open it up for them, but I hear you want to keep the protocol the right way, and so thank you for pointing it out. I do have Senator Weber from the great city of Laverne on the question list. Senator Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Since I was the only one at the table that hasn't asked a question, I thought I should step in. But no, I wanted to, Commissioner, in reference to the $3 million additional money that Senator Matthews had questioned you about, I guess as I look at the off years, as we look, if the February forecast stays somewhat close to the November forecast and we wind up having a substantial deficit, do you think it's wise to ask for additional money in the upcoming biennium in light of the off years being in the condition that they are?
Thank you, Senator Weber. Commissioner Arnold.
Chair Friends and Senator Weber, you know, as an administration, we've taken a really measured approach to making sure that we're addressing the deficit while investing where there's need to invest. And this operating adjustment is part of the governor's budget, which is part of the overall package that is addressing the deficit over the long term, tackling the areas where there are really large increases, especially over time, and then funding and continuing to fund at a level that you expect to deliver the kinds of programs that you expect you have given us over the last several years. And I assume we'll continue to deliver those services well and you know, the way that we should.
Thank you, Commissioner. Senator Weber.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just think that as we go forward, I think you might have to look at a reduction rather than an addition, but that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Weber. How about this innocuous question? We had talked about the $2.4 million added to the permitting reform bill, which I think was 11 FTEs. Could you just gently tell us, have those FTEs been filled? If not, how many short are we, if you know, Commissioner or Dr. Wyckoff or Assistant Commissioner?
So, Mr. Chair, the 11 FTEs, 5 of them, if I'm remembering right, are for this fiscal year. The remainder don't actually kick in to next fiscal year. We have been hiring. We have also lost people in this market, and I do not have off the top of my head how net ahead we are in response to that additional funding.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Wyckoff. Thank you, members. Thank you, Department of Commerce. As you can see, we've got some discussions we got to have. Look forward to being available for questions from any member of the committee. With that, we would ask the Public Utilities Commission to come forward. Members, we always shoot to be done around 2, but I think we're looking at something more like 2:15. I know we have till 2:30, but we're going to try to go till 2:15. And so, Mr. Seufert and Mr. Bull. Mr. Seufert. Mr. Bull, welcome back to the committee. Do you need any tech support?
We will find out shortly,
All
Mr.
right.
Chair.
Members, you do have in your packet the PUC agency and budget overview. I realize we took a little longer with Commerce than we thought, but that's how it goes sometimes.
I'll talk quickly.
Mr. Seufert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know why my screen is not sharing, so if we could get tech support, I would appreciate it. For the record, I'm Will Seufert, Executive Secretary for the Public Utilities Commission, and I'm joined by...
I'm Mike Bull. I'm the Deputy Executive Secretary. I returned to the Commission back in August of this last year to a job that I held back in 1997. So I'm happy to be back at the agency I love.
Thanks, Mr. Seufert. Mr.
Sounds
Bull?
good. Well, he's working on that. I'll just get started. Appreciate your time and the opportunity to present to you this afternoon. The Minnesota legislature created the Public Utilities Commission in 1874 to oversee and regulate services that are essential to the economic well-being of Minnesotans. Back then, oh, here we go. There we go. Wonderful. Thank you for your help. Back then it was to regulate railroads and warehouses. Today the mission of the PUC is to improve the lives of all Minnesotans by ensuring access to safe, reliable, and sustainable electric, natural gas, and landline telephone services at just and reasonable rates. The Public Utilities Commission is Minnesota's oldest regulatory body, and it has changed a lot since it was formed more than 100 years ago. The decisions of the agency impact the lives of Minnesotans in a variety of ways, whether that is the rates charged by for-profit utilities, the quality of electric, natural gas, or landline telephone service, or the quality of life for those who live nearby energy generation and transmission, to name just a few. The Commission recognizes the importance of the decisions it makes and does so in adherence to the general and specific directives enacted by the legislature and Minnesota statutes. We are a unique agency in state government with statutory authorities that are quasi-judicial, quasi-legislative, and administrative in nature. Statutes vest the power of the agency in 5 commissioners who are appointed by the governor and approved by the Senate. The governor selects the commission's chair, whose term is concurrent with that of the governor. The chair functions as the principal executive officer of the agency and has statutory authority to preside over the commission's meetings. Statutes give administrative authority over the agency to an executive secretary. Currently, the PUC is led by Chair Katie Sieben. Commissioners John Tuma, Joe Sullivan, Wickwon Ham are also serving terms, and as of February 10th, Audrey Partridge. As a reminder, the Senate is tasked with reviewing and confirming PUC commissioner appointments. I will also note that while the committee voted in favor of Commissioner Ham last session, the appointment wasn't taken up by the full Senate. We understand the committee will need to take Commissioner Ham's appointment back up, as well as Commissioner Partridge. We appreciate the time you spend considering these appointments, and will continue to work with you and your staff to set up introductory meetings. This is a very important slide, as we are unique in our structure. The PUC is very different from most state agencies for a couple of reasons. One is that we have a group of 5 commissioners instead of only a single decision maker. This means that we are subject to the state's open meeting law, which promotes transparency, but also places limits on how the agency makes decisions. In general, when the commission is making a decision or receiving information that could be relevant to a decision, that needs to be done in a publicly noticed meeting. The other reason is that we operate more like a court than a policy-setting agency. The vast majority of our work is responding to requests from utilities, customers, or other groups and resolving disputed issues like a panel of judges would resolve a court case. Also, like a judge, we base our decisions on specific factors that are established in law and must be anchored solely on the law and the facts developed in each docket. The factors that can apply change in different types of cases, but they're always based in the law. In order to preserve the independence and objectivity of the process, the Commission has some ethics rules that strictly limit what commissioners and staff can talk about. The simplest way to understand the rules is to imagine the Commission was actually a judge. You would not want a judge to go around having private conversations with people about cases, and there are rules to prevent that. The Commission has similar rules, the most restrictive being the ex parte rule. It totally prohibits commissioners from having discussions about material issues with parties or participants in a disputed case. Put simply, the ex parte rules apply to anyone who files comments in a case. An issue is material if it's relevant to the outcome of a case. So that doesn't include things like schedules or status update, but it does mean that commissioners can't have private conversations about whether or not to approve a proposal with anyone who is participating in a case. There are similar rules for Commission staff as well. Commission also has a code of conduct that is more general. It essentially requires that commissioners and staff act in a way that promotes public confidence in the integrity and impartiality of the agency. We often refer to the regulatory compact. This is the foundational relationship and structure established in statute between the utilities, their customers, and the regulator. In exchange for an exclusive right to serve customers in a defined service territory and an opportunity to recover costs and earn a reasonable rate of return, our utilities must provide safe and reliable service to all customers at just, reasonable, and non-discriminatory rates. The PUC oversees the electric and gas utilities to ensure performance. PUC's authority over utilities is primarily limited to for-profit companies that are owned by investors. PUC does not regulate most aspects of municipal utilities or electric cooperative associations, but it can mediate or investigate complaints about them and advise on their long-term plans. This slide highlights the primary areas of regulation of the PUC. The PUC's regulatory authority over electric and natural gas utilities includes setting utility standards and rates, approving utilities' long-term plans, and ensuring service quality, among other things. The PUC reviews requests by utilities and non-utilities that want to build large energy infrastructure projects like high-voltage transmission lines, power plants, solar farms, wind farms, storage facilities, and pipelines. The PUC is tasked with implementing or overseeing utility implementation of state energy policy. We have some slides later to provide updates on recent legislation, but this is a large portion of our work. PUC actively participates in MISO and FERC proceedings as an individual member and as part of the organization of MISO states and Southwest Power Pool to protect and promote states' interests and to influence regional transmission planning and wholesale market policy. PUC currently employs a staff of 77 FTE at its downtown St. Paul office in the Metro Square building. Generally, more than half of the Commission staff work in the Regulatory Analysis Division. Regulatory analysts from that division are responsible for analyzing and interpreting the issues that go before the Commission to help the Commissioners make decisions. They coordinate the process for building an administrative record, including the issuance of notices and convening public and stakeholder meetings. The Regulatory Analysis Division is made up of 4 subunits: Financial Analysis, which handles utility rate cases, rider filings, fuel adjustments, and other related financial matters. Economic Analysis, which handles telecommunications, utility long-term planning and service quality, utility customer programs, and other emerging issues. Energy Facilities Permitting, which handles energy facility applications, and Regional Energy Program, which supports Commission participation in regional and federal proceedings that impact Minnesota utilities and their customers. On July 1st, 2025, the Energy Environmental Review and Analysis Division is being transferred to the PUC from the Department of Commerce as part of the 2024 permitting reform. The agency also has 3 other units. The Consumer Affairs Office mediates complaints about utilities from utility customers, provides outreach and assistance with cold weather rule, telephone assistance enrollment, Federal Lifeline Program, and other related programs. The Legal Unit drafts the Commission's orders and provides legal advice. And finally, the Business Services Unit manages the agency's operations and finances, human resources, and provides general administrative support. So how are we doing? This slide captures some highlights of recent Commission activities. Looking back at rate petitions filed over the past 4 years, the PUC has rejected over $1.7 billion in proposed rate increases since 2020. This is the difference between what the utilities have asked for in their rate cases and what the Commission ultimately approved after these fully litigated proceedings. The Commission is able to make these decisions because of the hard work of consumer advocates and state agencies scrutinizing the requests and providing sound recommendations. In particular, the Department of Commerce and Attorney General Office Residential Utilities Division. We manage roughly 765 unique dockets annually. As the energy industry is transitioning, these dockets are becoming increasingly complex, with greater levels of public participation and increased litigation risk. The PUC has emphasized reducing regulatory lag over the past few years and measured a 48% decrease in extensions issued in 2024. We saw and welcomed a significant uptick in public comments received across the 34 permit proceedings conducted in 2024, with over 7,600 public comments filed. Over the course of the year, there were 54 public hearings for these facilities dockets. The PUC is committed to public engagement and encourages broad-based participation in PUC work. This level of engagement helps fully inform commissioners so they can make the best decisions on matters before them. And finally, the Consumer Affairs Office is very active as well, engaging in over 35,000 contacts with consumers and utilities annually. This small team of 5 mediators saved customers over $300,000 last year alone in bill credits and refunds. The PUC is dedicated to ensuring the performance of our state's regulated utilities. We generally look at utility performance in 3 categories: reliability, affordability, and environmental performance. This slide uses different proxies to illustrate performance. For reliability, this shows the SAIDI index. This is the System Average Interruption Duration Index. This is a measurement of how quickly utilities restore power following outages. These measurements are reviewed in annual utility service quality proceedings. Here you see how the average for Minnesota IOUs outperforms their national peer utilities. For cost, here we look at the average electric bills that Minnesota residents pay in comparison to other states. And you can see Minnesota utilities outperforming their peers across the country. And finally, for environmental performance, this metric looks at greenhouse gas emissions in the electricity generation sector. When you compare this to economy-wide greenhouse gas reduction goals in statute, the electricity sector is on pace to meet the targets codified in the Next Generation Energy Act, with carbon dioxide emissions down 50% since 2005. I wanted to take an extra slide to highlight costs, since there is a specific goal in statute on this topic. Minnesota Statute 216C.05, Subdivision 4, sets a goal to have retail electricity rates for each customer class be at least 5% below the national average. On average, for rates, Minnesota IOUs are at 95% of the national average, as recent as 2022. While our utilities consistently meet this goal for residential customers, industrial rates, however, are above the national average. Thus, we are not meeting the goal for that customer class. This trend goes back to 2021. The Commission takes this seriously and continues to work towards this goal as it evaluates utility performance. Now you have a better sense of who we are, how we operate, and how we're performing. I want to take a couple slides to present our current and proposed budget. In the current biennium, in fiscal 24-25, the agency operated with an appropriation of $11.55 and $11.39 million per year. 100% of the agency's expenditures are recovered through special assessment authority outlined in Minnesota statutes and returned to the State General Fund. Of that appropriation, roughly 95% of the agency's budget goes to staff compensation, office space, and IT support. The agency also administers the Telephone Assistance Program from a special revenue fund. Reimbursement grants are provided to telephone companies who assist their eligible low-income customers with reduced rates. In addition to the agency's operating budget, $1 million was appropriated to the PUC in 2024 to contract for a study of carbon pipeline impacts, which is due on November 2026. We issued a solicitation in the fall and did not have any qualified bidders. We are in the process of issuing an RFP shortly. The next 2 slides highlight 4 separate change items that are proposed in the governor's 26-27 budget for the PUC. Similar to our current operating budget, these appropriations are recoverable through utility assessments and thereby returned to the general fund. The first proposal is an operating adjustment of $236,000 in the first year and $478,000 in the second year. This is an enterprise-wide adjustment proposed to offset budget pressure due to increases in things like employer-paid healthcare contributions, salary and compensation-related costs, as well as other operating costs like IT and legal services. This cost growth puts pressure on agency budgets that otherwise remain flat. This adjustment allows us to maintain current service levels. The second proposal is funding for a dedicated tribal liaison and associated costs to implement the requirements of Minnesota Statute 10.65, the Tribal Consultation Statute. As many of you know, the 2024 legislature added us to the list of agencies covered under this section of law. In recent years, the Commission has seen and welcomes a steady increase in tribal participation in PUC dockets. The Commission wants to make sure it has the resources to maintain these important relationships with the 11 sovereign tribal nations in Minnesota and ensure full compliance with the law. The third proposal in the governor's budget is for natural gas utility resource planning and coordination. This request of $553,000 per year will support 3 FTE and modeling software licenses to address the Public Utility Commission's new and increasing regulatory responsibilities for natural gas utility resource planning and coordination. The need is driven by recent weather events, policy changes, and industry trends. This proposed increase in staffing capacity is necessary for the Commission to oversee the energy transition in the gas sector, consistent with state law. Modeling and scenario analysis in the gas sector requires unique analytic expertise and tools different than the electric sector. New regulatory issues for gas utilities center around cost recovery, infrastructure investments, and competitive acquisition, and will make gas utility rate cases more complex. Recent winter storms resulted in federal initiatives to address gas-electric system coordination to ensure safe, reliable, and affordable energy services during periods of great stress on these systems. This budget initiative will also support the Commission's sustained engagement in that work. And the final PUC proposal in the governor's budget is an annual appropriation of $820,000 for technology maintenance and innovation. The PUC needs critical information technology resources and modernizations to efficiently perform its core regulatory tasks with public access and accountability. The PUC operates its regulatory program, consumer affairs support, and business functions on shared interagency applications that are outdated and impacted by interruptions and outages. Pursuant to 2024 law, the Commission is also incorporating a staff unit from the Department of Commerce to implement the permitting reform. This requires updates to legacy applications and new IT systems to manage work and expand public engagement. This appropriation will provide the Commission with dedicated resources to maintain core regulatory applications, support and update an interactive public meeting platform, integrate enterprise-wide IT updates, provide agency-wide training, and manage all IT-related work. With enhanced and ongoing IT support, the PUC will be able to manage its work with greater transparency, customer engagement, and efficiency. This proposal was developed in partnership with Minute Services. We appreciate your consideration of our budget proposals. Before wrapping up, I'm going to turn it over to Mike to update you on implementation of 2024 law.
Thank you, Mr. Seufert. Mr. Bull.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I want to touch on a few things relatively quickly. I know we're up against time. In addition to the bread and butter dockets like rate cases, resource plans, infrastructure permitting that the Commission staff work on, we also work to implement the legislation you've passed in recent years. I'll start with legislation that was authored by Senator McEwen and Senator Zhang, requiring the Commission to establish a thermal energy network deployment work group to examine potential regulatory opportunities for regulated natural gas utilities to deploy what's called thermal energy networks, or TENS, and the potential barriers to that deployment. That work group is ongoing, and we'll have a report detailing recommendations for you by the end of the year. A second piece of legislation I want to talk about was also authored by Senator McEwen to direct electric utilities to evaluate the cost and feasibility of installing grid-enhancing technologies, or GETs, on their transmission systems to alleviate congestion. GETs are hardware or software technologies like power flow controls and dynamic line ratings that allow for more efficient use of existing transmission capacity. Under that legislation, the electric utilities that own significant transmission in the state will incorporate GETs into their next biennial transmission plan due to the Commission next November, and will propose GETs projects to the Commission as part of that plan. Next. Legislation also authored by Senator Zhang, who's very active as a great senator, I appreciate your work, Senator, required the commission to develop generic statewide standards governing the sharing of the cost of upgrading congested or constrained locations on utility distribution systems in order to allow for the interconnection of distributed generation projects. The legislation also established an ombudsperson. It took me quite a little while to practice ombudsperson for mediating disputes between utilities, project developers, and consumers. The distribution interconnection work under this provision is underway, and the ombudsperson has begun mediating disputes. A fourth provision I wanted to highlight this afternoon was authored by Senator Dibble to provide additional protections to renters who receive utility bills through a landlord or third-party rebilling company rather than directly from the utility. The law essentially provides the same protections for those renters that the renter would have received if he or she were billed directly by the utility. Among other things, this law ensures tenants are protected from utility shutoff under the cold weather rule, and provides remedies for tenants who receive inaccurate bills, authorizing the Public Utilities Commission Consumer Affairs Office to respond to and resolve tenant complaints. And further, the law requires that tenants must be notified in writing of the availability of energy assistance from the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program that you all heard about last week. This legislation just went into effect in January. Senator Frentz was the chief author of the Minnesota Energy Infrastructure Permitting Act, which was the first comprehensive overhaul of the state's permitting processes for energy infrastructure in decades, with the goal of making this process more efficient without sacrificing opportunities for public input. Among other things, the commission consolidated, as you've heard, the environmental review staff at the PUC, established a formal pre-application process for large energy infrastructure projects, which could eliminate delays in permit issuance, consolidated the approval processes for large infrastructure projects from multiple processes into two, the major and the standard process, and allowed draft environmental assessments for projects under the standard review to be prepared by the applicant, subject to the review and edit of our environmental review staff. And this legislation goes into effect, for the most part, next July. And finally, I wanted to highlight these other pieces of legislation that were passed in previous years. Senator Weber was the chief author of the Natural Gas Innovation Act in 2021, which was enacted in the wake of the Winter Storm Uri to allow natural gas utilities to explore and demonstrate innovative ways to provide service to their customers, including through renewable natural gas, hydrogen, and enhanced energy efficiency. CenterPoint's initial NGIA plan was approved by the Commission in the fall. Xcel's first plan was approved by the Commission last week. These plans are voluntary and subject to annual review by the Commission. Senator Rarick was the chief author of the Energy Conservation and Optimization Act, also in 2021. This legislation was the first comprehensive overhaul of the state's energy efficiency framework in decades. ECO is overseen by the Minnesota Department of Commerce, as you've heard, and the Commission reviews and approves the costs associated with ECO plans of rate-regulated utilities, as well as reviews the utility resource plans for the amount of efficiency resource the utility expects to acquire cost-effectively from its customers to serve its customers. And the last piece of legislation I wanted to highlight is the Commission's work to implement the carbon-free standard that was enacted, authored by Senator Frentz, enacted in 2023. Since that bill has passed, the Commission has been taking comments from utilities, agencies, advocates, and other stakeholders as directed by the legislature to issue guidance on a series of implementation issues. We've issued 2 rounds of guidance under that law and expect to complete the guidance process by the first quarter of next year. And back to Will to...
All right, this is our last slide. I just wanted to highlight different ways that you can stay informed about the work of the PUC. I think the most significant thing here, though, I do want to highlight for you is if you are contacted by your constituents with difficult problems, conflicts they're dealing to resolve utility matters, we have a team of mediators that are available to help them, and so please don't hesitate reaching out to any of us to try to resolve those concerns. But I think with that, we've talked a lot and want to make sure we have some time if you have questions. So, thank you.
Will has agreed to answer all your hard questions.
Thank you, Mr. Seifert. Mr. Bulb, members, we'll go to questions now. Have Senator Gruenhagen, then Senator Zhang, and I see Senator Green. Senator Gruenhagen.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, thanks for the presentation. We're short on time, so I'll just make one statement, and you can respond if you want to. You know, back to your mission statement is to improve the lives of all Minnesotans by ensuring safe, reliable, and sustainable utility services at just and reasonable rates. Well, a few meetings ago, we just had a presentation that a growing number of Minnesotans are struggling or can't pay their electric bills. I think it's up to 36% and growing. So I think you got your work cut out for you. And of course, the answer is, well, just give them more tax subsidies. I mean, that is not the answer. The other thing, we should be hardening our grid from the articles I've read. Our grid desperately needs to be upgraded and hardened against cyber attacks and things like that. And instead, we're wasting money on this other stuff. So you can respond if you want, but that's just my statements.
Thank you, Senator Gruenhagen. Mr. Seifert, Mr. Bull, you're welcome to respond. Otherwise, I can go to the next question.
We'll just say we take those concerns very seriously. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Seifert. Thank you, Senator Gruenhagen. Senator Zhang, and then Senator Green.
Thank you, Chair. I had a question in regards to the gas electric comprehensive resource planning. I see you have requested 3 FTEs, mainly focused on the natural gas initiatives, natural gas utilities. As you mentioned, this session I introduced a securitization bill for natural gas utilities. And as we've been working with the PUC on the fiscal note, you know, I was a little surprised to see, to learn that your interpretation is that the bill would require new FTEs for that portion of it. You know, it's just a little surprising since it's designed to be a rarely and hopefully never used insurance policy, and it's not a year-round program. Would the ongoing fiscal note for securitization be necessary if the PUC's budget request for the 3 new FTEs is approved?
Senator Zhang, you're looking to Mr. Seifert for that, perhaps?
Yeah.
Mr. Seifert.
Mr. Chair, Senator, great question. We'll have to look at that. So we did submit a fiscal note for a bill that's scheduled, I believe, on Wednesday, and it does outline the assumptions that we have in terms of the work that we would need to do if we were to get securitization requests from utilities. It's our best guess. It's our best estimate. I think you outlined it accurately. We hope to never have to use it. It might never have to get used. But if we were to experience an event and have a request to securitize $2 billion of generational expenses for customers, we also want to make sure we have access to the expertise to do that. I think to your question about whether this could cover that, it's possible. This was proposed based on our experience and understanding of the challenges and complexities right now of the gas and electric system and the overlap there and some of the issues we've experienced with recent winter storms. So this was developed not contemplating the securitization piece, but one of the FTEs that we identify in the proposal, which is in our change item, is a financial analyst to dive into some of the more complex financing components of that. So there might be some overlap, and I think we look forward to having that conversation over the course of the session.
Thank you, Mr. Seifert. Senator Zhang?
Thank you, Chair. So I think, I guess said differently, could one of those new FTEs be available to administer, you know, the securitization? I'm guessing that's from what you're saying.
Mr. Seifert?
Mr. Chair, Senator, it's possible.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
We haven't considered that because we didn't make this expecting securitization because it's not currently permissible under current law.
Thank you, Mr. Seifert. Senator Zhang, you're good?
Yeah, thank you,
All
Chair.
right, we're going to go to Senator Green. Senator Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 2 questions. Along the same line as Senator Zhang, that's what I had marked here, because it looks like you're asking for 9 new FTEs, is that correct?
Mr. Seifert.
Mr. Chair, Senator, yes, that's correct.
Mr.
Senator
Chair.
Green.
So how many current employees, how many are currently employed by the PUC?
Mr. Seifert. I had 77.
Mr. Chair, 77.
Senator Green.
Okay, and I did write that down too, but the reason I asked is because when I looked it up online, it said 50. But, so I must have been looking at the wrong one, so I wanted to clarify that. So then, Mr. Chair, one last comment.
Senator Green.
And I don't know that I expect you to respond to this, but it's a pretty good percentage that you're adding there with 9. And I have the same concerns as Senator Zhang that maybe especially with the budget deficits we got coming at us, I haven't seen anybody come in yet in any of my committees that said, boy, I think we could make some cuts here. And so it'd be nice to see something in the way of saying we consolidate some of the employees that we have and make some of these things work. But thank you.
Thank you, Senator Green. Mr. Seifert, you leaned towards your microphone as if you wanted to make a brief response.
Briefly, Mr. Chair, thank you for the
Mr.
opportunity.
Seifert.
We appreciate the question and do recognize percentage-wise, it is a significant request, but I do want to reinforce to the committee, we are largely a reactive body. We respond to petitions from utilities and others in order to ensure a safe, reliable, and affordable energy system. And take rate cases as one example. We are getting a number of utility rate petitions with regularity now that historically hasn't come in at that level. So the pace of work we have is largely based on the circumstances of the energy system and what the regulated parties are bringing to us. And I do want to close on the number that we shared earlier. If you just look back over the last 4 years in dollars requested from the commission and dollars approved, that's $1.7 billion is a significant return to ratepayers that we provide and value that we add in doing the regulatory work.
Thank you, Mr. Seifert. Thank you, Senator Green and Senator Zhang. These are the questions that we should be asking. And I think at a time of budget deficit projection, we're asking the same of agencies that we would ask of Minnesota families. I do want to come back, Senator Gruenhagen, to the question about costs, because one of the costs that Minnesotans are facing is a dramatic increase in property insurance, and it's largely driven by climate change. The fires now in Southern California, just that episode, $152 billion. And so as we look at costs for Minnesotans, and we look at what it costs to buy a kilowatt of electricity, we also have to ask, what is it that we're doing to help reduce the number of times we have 150 billion of fires, and what is the relationship? Because the average Minnesotan doesn't know the name of a PUC commissioner or state senator, and they don't care. They want to know what is the cost. And property damage insurance is going through the roof around this country. Senator Gruenhagen, I wanted to add, I noticed on the chart here that Minnesota is below the national average on costs. So that I want to thank the members of the PUC to the extent that ratepayer protection is part of your mandate. Having said that, I'm prepared to gavel this hearing to a close. Senator Gruenhagen, would you like to be
Just quick
heard?
response, since you mentioned my name. And steel sharpens steel, right? No, as far as California is concerned, I was in the Marine Corps out there for 2 years. They bulldozed fire breaks, and they also did controlled burns. They quit doing that, okay, to protect guppies or whatever, bugs or whatever. I agree with President Trump. The science of forestry would have prevented that fire. It's the scam of global warming and letting the brush grow up, burning the whole thing down.
Senator Gruenhagen, did President Trump send you any surveys on Florida hurricanes?
I'll double check.
Thank you. Members of the public, thanks for letting us go back and forth. Nice job, members, to ask tougher questions. With that, we are adjourned.